always had a good, he had something at the tip of his tongue.
Once I was caught chewing gum in the 4th grade, and the teacher made me paste the gum on my cheek, and she sent me around to all the other rooms with a note. And the note said, can you imagine this is Percy's sister?
Because Percy was a good boy, he never did anything wrong.
What about Uncle Si? You haven't told any stories about Uncle Si.
Well, I
I
might
can
have
tell you
some,
funny
I don't think
stories.
they would have some.
Uncle Si used to come home, he was a traveling salesman, he traveled for Grandpa. And he'd come home and he'd unpack his suitcase, he always had something in it for us. But he would start taking his things out, and he'd take his shoes out, and he'd take the shoelaces out. He said, here, I want you to wash and press my shoelaces. And
Uncle Si.
I'd say, sure, and he'd give me $5.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he was very generous. In those days, $5
That's
was
a lot of money.
But it was so funny. He was always having us do errands for us, especially me doing all these little crazy errands for him. And he paid me so well. And some of my friends said, well, why do you do all those crazy things? And I said, because he pays me.
$5 is a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot of money.
Uncle Si, as Esther said, was a salesman on the road all the time. And he would come home with the craziest, but he could make a bargain. He could buy the Brooklyn Bridge
As long as
for
it was a
5
bargain.
cents.
Yeah.
He could buy anything cheap. And he'd come home with a big suitcase full of, one time it might be skirts, one time it might be bathrobes. You never know what he can't come
It
home
could
with.
be a back seat full of end tables like that.
When,
Sounds like a mafia to me.
Well,
and
he know he.
there was a car agency in Malden where all the family would buy automobiles. When they saw Uncle Si coming, they closed their doors. They didn't want to.
Because he talked them into giving him the car so cheap that just to get rid of him, they'd sell it to him. And they'd never make any money on him. Nobody could ever make a dime
And
on
I'll
him.
tell you one thing, there were 5 salesmen. My father and my uncle were partners, almost. And there were 5 salesmen who were the sons of these people. There was Percy, and Sign, Eddie Weber, and
Well, Jimmy went on the road for him.
No,
No, Jimmy never worked for him, but Mike
you
did.
know, but anyway, they,
The whole bunch of them together never sold nearly what Si sold.
well, the
He-
thing is, Uncle Maya used to really lean hard on Percy. He was mean to him. Uncle Maya was a very mean person. I know, I worked there. But he would not he wouldn't dare to make Percy miserable because he
No,
was afraid
he
of
would-
Si.
Yeah,
Don't tell me no, I
Yeah.
was there and you weren't.
yeah.
He was afraid of Si, because if Si left, there'd be no organization of sales.
He had
people.
Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And he traveled thousands of miles a week, but he pulled in business. There were little stores up in the boonies there in Maine and New Hampshire where hardly any salesman ever dared to drive up to. Some of them had dirt roads in those days. And he could take that car anywhere, and he could talk anybody into buying anything. He could sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. He really could.
Well,
But bargains he'd get. He'd bring the craziest things home. He'd sell something to somebody, and then he'd strike a bargain with them, and he'd come home with 10 bath towels. Crazy colors, you know, a dozen sheets. I mean, but he never bought anything for himself. He gave everything away to all of us.
Si never got a paycheck. Whatever he earned went to my father, and to help just support the family.
And as soon as my father died, Si said, we gotta sell our share and put Percy into business because he can't live like that with him. So he's not good to him. So Percy opened a store and we all opened it with him. We
And that's the
remember-
Army Navy store?
Yeah, in Melrose, and he did
But,
very well.
So wait, Cy did that because he knew that Percy couldn't work with Meyer without your dad there?
Well, whatever empathy or sympathy or kindness my uncle ever showed to Percy was because of my father, whom he really was close to and loved, or because he was afraid of Cy. Now, Cy left the business as soon as my father died, and he went up to Portland and made a fortune owning the town taxi in the middle of the war. You know, when Churchill came to this country, and they had a summit meeting in the White Mountains, Uncle Cy drove him up there, because he owned the taxi company, and this was a big celebrity.
Yeah.
Yeah, he made a lot of money, but he hated the taxi business. He sold it as soon as he could get a good buyer, and he got a good buyer for it. Wow, he used to work half the night. He used to work day and night. And he ended up having a whole fleet of cabs. He must have had about 20 cabs. But he had to work too hard. And he bought his business. He had signed a contract, an agreement with my uncle that he would not go into the same kind of business for so many years. 4 years or something like that. But the minute the time was up, he bought his own business. And my uncle had no more Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont business after that. He sold the same kind of stuff. He still had Massachusetts business, because Cy never went into Massachusetts. But Cy had the Maine, New Hampshire. He was a super salesman. Talk anybody.
Well, Cy told a story once. It was, he drove into a severe snowstorm up in northern Maine to see his trade. And they used to pair up. So instead of two guys driving two cars, there was two guys driving one. So if they got stuck, they were able to get out of it. And Cy and his friend, he used to know his name, were driving through northern Maine. There was a severe snowstorm.
The other fellow sold hats.
What?
Hats.
That's somebody.
No, he sold
Leeds.
hats.
No, that was Bill Leeds selling the hats, but that's all right.
No. Bill Leeds was a doctor.
You weren't even there, I was.
Well, I know. I know the whole story.
However,
He was a hat
Cy
salesman.
was traveling, and when they got far up into Maine, they paired up with another guy, because two was easier than one, and he and this other guy were traveling in really the northern regions of Maine, big snow, and they passed a guy who was stuck, and they kept on going, and after about 10 to 15 minutes, these two real tough guys looked at each other. They shook their heads, they turned around and went back to rescue the other guy out of the snow pile. That's kind of a guy he was.
How come he never had kids? Did he never want
Well,
kids?
he didn't get married till he was 55 years old, and the woman he married had 2 grown-up children.
I didn't know that.
He was
Was
a
she a
bachelor.
widower?
What?
When Uncle Cy
Was his first wife a widow?
living in Portland.
His only wife.
Yeah, was
She
she
was
a widow?
What were you saying,
He
Uncle?
was only married for about 12 or 15 years.
When he was living in Portland, Maine, he became very good friends with Sidney Davidson, who had a couple of jewelry stores and was quite wealthy.
Oh, he had about 15
Yeah,
jewelry stores.
and he made a nice group of men friends up there who were all in business and pretty wealthy.
Oh, yes.
And
Jo-
one story I
George
remember-
Lewis was a multi-millionaire,
Yes.
this friend of his. He's the one who built the Portland Civic Center, one of the
Trying to get a word.
the
I
Civic
remember
Center.
one story that he
His name
told
is-
us about going on a trip to New York in a freezing, freezing cold winter storm, and they got off the plane without any coats on. And somebody said to them, freezing cold, why aren't you wearing coats? Cold? You call this cold? Not where we come from, up in Maine.
So did he never wanted to get married, or he was just too
No,
busy
he was
working?
a bachelor, and he traveled all the time, and I guess he didn't want to get married.
He had a nice group of friends in Malden too. They were all bachelors, and 3 or 4 of them had an apartment. We called it the Ranch, remember? And
Jessel.
they used to have good times together, playing cards and going to ball games and
Yeah, he did a lot
all
of
those
sports
things.
stuff and things like
And
that.
one day he brought Lillian to our house. And, your grandpa and I looked at each other, sighed with the woman, and, he was kind of showing off his family, and Lillian was there. And, you had trouble with Lillian, you didn't like her.
I didn't have any trouble with her. She hated me because she had a daughter who was a great big 0, and she was the same age as I was. She couldn't get into a college. I went to college. She couldn't get a job. I taught school. And so she she already had Alzheimer's. She died of Alzheimer's, you know. She went completely out of her mind. So when she was at the beginning of the Alzheimer's, she began to take a dislike to me. And she was very, very jealous because Cy did not like her daughter at all. And he adored me. So, this was a ball of contention. I gotta go because it's gonna get dark.